The old man struggled up the hill, dragging a rusty cart full of strange-looking car parts. Neighbors peeked from porches, smirking. A group of teens pointed and laughed. "Look at him! What's he building? A time machine?" He didn't respond, just kept pulling, slow, steady, determined. When he reached his yard, he whispered, "Today's the day." Nobody expected the secret he'd been hiding for decades. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. The old man's house sat at the very edge of town, where the neat sidewalks ended and the cracked gravel started, where streetlights got lazy and the night seemed a little darker than it should. Paint peeled off the old clapboard siding like thin curls of paper. The porch sagged just enough to complain every time somebody stepped on it. The roof had seen better decades. The small front yard was more dirt than grass, with stubborn weeds fighting for territory. Most folks just drove past it. They saw the broken screen door, the rusted mailbox, the junk piled by the side of the house, and thought, "Poor old man, lost his mind a long time ago." They didn't see the way the hinges on that door were freshly oiled. They didn't notice the careful way the tools were stacked. They couldn't hear the low hum of thought inside the small shed out back, where the real story lived. Inside that shed, the world was different. It smelled like oil and old metal, dust and coffee. Shelves lined every wall, packed with labeled jars of bolts and washers, carefully cleaned gears, polished pieces of chrome that caught the light like quiet stars. A workbench ran along the back, worn smooth from decades of hands, covered now with diagrams, sketches, and a yellowed notebook thick with tiny, precise handwriting. At the center of it all, hunched over a metal part clamped in a vise, was the man everyone called Old Earl. Earl wasn't the oldest man in town, but he looked like he'd carried more years than most. His skin was deep and dark, creased by sun and worry. His beard a wild spread of white that refused to be tamed. His hair, what was left of it, curled tight against his scalp. His hands were strong and steady, stained permanently by grease and time. His eyes, though, those were sharp. They were the kind of eyes that saw how things worked just by looking at them. The kind that could tell you what was wrong with a car from the sound of the engine 3 houses away. The kind of eyes that used to be sought after once. Not anymore. Most people saw a lonely, poor old black man living in a dying house. They didn't see the mechanic who'd once kept an entire factory floor running. They didn't see the inventor who'd once designed parts that other men took credit for. They didn't see the man who was finishing something he'd started 20 years ago. Earl held the part up to the light, turning it slowly in his fingers. It was heavy and precise, smooth where it needed to be smooth, ridged where it needed grip. He ran a thumb along the edge, satisfied. He murmured. "Now that's right." He walked over to a shelf and lifted a small wooden box, carefully placing the piece inside, next to others just like it. Some small, some complicated, all labeled. He closed the lid and exhaled slowly. "That's the last one," he whispered to himself. His voice sounded strange in the quiet room, like it hadn't had much work lately. On the other side of the thin wall, a bird called. A car rolled by on the distant road. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked at nothing. Earl wiped his hands on a rag and looked around his shed. Blueprints were pinned to a corkboard, side views, top views, exploded diagrams with arrows and notes in small letters. He knew them by heart. He'd drawn them late at night for years, memory and muscle guiding his pen. On one wall hung an old black and white photo from his factory days. He was young in it. stronger in his shoulders, hairline unbroken, laughter in his face. He stood beside a machine that never made it to market, hand resting on a sleek metal hood. "We could have changed the world with that one," he told the photo softly. But the world wasn't ready. Or maybe the people who ran it weren't. He touched the frame, just for a moment, then turned back to the work at hand. In the corner of the shed, near the back door, sat 3 large plastic crates. They were clean, but old. Lids duct-taped, each one labeled in his neat, steady print. Engine components, body parts, front, body parts, rear. He stood there, hands on his hips, nodding to himself. "All right then," he said quietly. "Time to show you the sun again." He grabbed one crate by the handles. His shoulders protested. His back complained. But he lifted it anyway, slow and steady, and shuffled toward the door. Outside, the early morning light was soft, gray-blue, not yet harsh enough to reveal every flaw of the yard. Dew clung to the weeds. The chill in the air cut through his thin jacket, but he didn't mind. He'd worked in colder, under worse roofs. The street was mostly empty, a few cars far off, a delivery truck on the cross street. The world hadn't fully woken. Earl shuffled toward the front yard, crate in his arms. Across the street, a teenage boy leaned on the railing of a small porch, hoodie half-zipped, backpack at his feet. He watched the old man quietly, as he did most mornings before school. Evan Mitchell had grown up watching Earl roll carts and drag crates, haul metal and scrap from one place to another. His mama called the old man that junk collector. His stepfather called him the crazy one at the end of the road. But Evan saw something else. He saw the way Earl treated each part like it mattered. The way he walked with a plan, not just wandering. The way his eyes never looked confused, only focused. Evan raised a hand in a small wave. "Morning, Mr. Earl," he called. Earl glanced up, surprised, then nodded with a small smile. "Morning, boy." "You need help?" Evan asked. Earl shook his head. "Nah, I got this one, but I appreciate you asking." Evan hesitated like he wanted to come over anyway, but his mother called from inside, and he grabbed his backpack reluctantly. "I'll see you later," Evan shouted. Earl nodded again and set the first crate down near the patch of yard beside his house, the flattest spot, the place he'd cleared last week. "One trip at a time," he muttered, rubbing his back. "Ain't no rush now. We waited 20 years. She can wait till I get all her pieces in place." He went back for the second crate. By the time he brought the third, the street had grown busier. People driving to work, kids walking to school. The world finally awake enough to notice the old man pushing plastic bins across his dirt yard. A woman slowed her car at the stop sign and peered over the steering wheel with a faint frown. There he is again, she thought, always with that trash. On the corner, 2 teenagers on bikes stopped to watch. One of them, a tall boy in a red hoodie, smirked. "Yo," he snippered to his friend. "Look at him. Dude really building a robot or something?" His friend laughed. "Old man, straight out of some apocalypse movie. Bet he thinks the world's ending." They laughed as Earl bent over a crate, catching his breath. He heard them. He always did, but he never looked their way, never gave them the satisfaction of a flinch. "They can talk," he murmured. "Mouths is free, plans ain't." He straightened up and opened the first crate carefully, lifting out a wrapped metal panel and laying it gently on a folded blanket he'd placed on the dirt. Piece by piece, he set everything out, parts arranged in an order only he fully understood. Across the street, Evan watched from his porch again, 1 foot halfway toward the steps. His bus was late. His curiosity wasn't. He saw the teens pointing, mimicking Earl's movements with mocking exaggeration. He's wasting what little money he has. A woman walking her dog muttered under her breath as she passed. Should be saving for a nurse, not whatever this is. Another neighbor popped her head through a curtain and sighed. Poor old man, she said, lost the last of his sense, collecting trash like Tria. What none of them knew was that Earl had already done the math 100 times. He'd skipped new clothes, skipped vacations he never would have taken anyway, skipped eating out, fancy couches, big TVs, saved every extra penny for rusted parts and junk nobody else saw value in. They saw foolishness. He saw an equation finally about to balance. He finished laying out the parts, then went back to his shed to pull out something he'd hidden under an old tarp, a steel frame, curved and strong, like the skeleton of a sleeping animal. He'd built it in secret, late at night, piece by piece. Today, he was ready to wake it up. He dragged it slowly toward the spot he'd chosen, boots digging into the dirt. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw more faces at windows, more eyes peeking over fences. He heard one of the teens call out, louder this time. "Yo, old man, you building the spaceship or what?" Laughter followed, bright and sharp. Earl paused, leaning on the frame, chest rising and falling with effort. He could feel their eyes on him like flies. He was used to it. 20 years of being the joke at the edge of town. He just hadn't expected the audience to be this big today. He looked at his spread of parts, his careful layout, his crates now empty. His heart beat slow and steady. This was it. He rubbed his thumb over a small ridge in the metal, the way a man might trace the face of an old friend. "Today's the day," he whispered. The morning felt ordinary from the outside. Same cracked street, same tired houses, same old man moving too slow with too much stuff. But to Earl, this day wasn't ordinary at all. It was the day his secret stopped being a secret. The day his junk finally revealed what it truly was. The day the world around him would have to choose between what they always thought they knew and what was standing, shining, undeniable, right in front of them. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and reached for the first bolt. The project he'd worked on in silence for 2 decades was ready. Whether the town was or not, that was their problem. Morning rolled into midday, and the sun climbed high enough to burn the mist off Earl's yard. The heat didn't bother him much. He'd spent most of his life working beneath hotter roofs, engines roaring beside his ears, metal scorching his palms. This kind of warmth felt almost gentle. But the voices? Those never felt gentle. The first one came from the couple next door. They were out watering their patchy lawn, arguing softly until the woman suddenly leaned her elbow against her husband and nodded toward Earl's yard. "There he go again," she whispered, dragging trash back and forth like it's worth something. Her husband grunted. "Man's losing it. You see his place? House looks ready to fall down. He should be saving for repairs instead of hoarding junk." The woman snorted. "What repairs? That whole house needs a miracle." They both chuckled, thinking Earl couldn't hear them. He heard every word, every syllable, carried clear as a bell across the warm air. He didn't look up, didn't pause, didn't defend himself. He tightened a bolt on the frame instead, humming softly under his breath. A little later, 2 teen girls walked past on their way toward the bus stop. Their backpacks jingled with keychains. Their voices were loud enough to make sure he heard. "Ain't nobody tell me the dump moved to this street," one sneered. The other wrinkled her nose dramatically. "I swear, every time I walk by this house, my allergies act up. Probably all that rust floating around." They giggled, then pulled out their phones, Hold on, let me snap this for my story. Hashtag when your neighbor is one bad day from an episode. The phone clicked. Earl's hands tightened around the metal bar he was measuring, but he forced them steady again. Behind them, sitting in his usual spot on the porch steps, Evan watched the whole thing unfold, jaw tight. He wanted to shout something at the girls, tell them they didn't know anything, tell them to leave the old man alone, but he didn't. Not yet. He wasn't brave like Earl. Evan stood slowly, slinging his backpack over his shoulder as he made his way down the porch steps. "Mr. Earl," he called gently. Earl looked up, shading his eyes. "You getting to school late today, boy?" "Bus broke down again," Evan said with a shrug. "Driver said to walk to the next stop." "You need a lift?" Evan glanced at Earl's old brown sedan, rust crawling up the sides, windows cloudy, hood held down with two thick leather straps. He hesitated politely. "Nah, thank you, I'll walk." Earl chuckled. Smart choice. But the smile faded quickly when three boys on bikes rolled up behind Evan, drifting to a stop at Earl's fence. The tallest one, Marcus, the same kid who mocked him earlier, stared at the spread-out metal parts with exaggerated curiosity. "So what's all this?" he asked loudly. "You making a robot? Or maybe a time machine?" His friends laughed. Marcus leaned over the fence, grabbing a long metal rod. "Careful with that," Earl said sharply. "It ain't scrap." Marcus twirled it like a baton. "Sure looks like scrap." "Put it down," Evan said quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You telling me what to do now?" Evan swallowed but didn't back down. "That belongs to him." Marcus scoffed and tossed the rod onto the dirt, where it landed inches from Earl's foot. "Oops," he said with a smirk. "My bad." Earl bent slowly, picking up the rod without a word. He wiped off a speck of dirt with the sleeve of his jacket and placed it carefully on the blanket with the other parts. His movements were calm, deliberate, like he'd expected this. That only made the boys mock him more. "You see that?" one laughed. "He really thinks this junk's important. Man needs a hobby that ain't embarrassing." Evan felt his chest heat with anger. "Y'all don't have to be like that," Marcus scoffed again. "Come on, Ev. Old dude's just giving us entertainment." Evan turned to Earl. "Sir, you want me to call someone? They shouldn't be messing with your things." Earl shook his head gently. "Folks been messin' with my things long as I can remember," he said. "Ain't never stopped me before." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Whatever, man. Let's go find something fun to do." The boys pedaled away, laughing loudly. Evan lingered, watching them disappear down the block. "Sorry about them," he murmured. "Ain't your apology to give," Earl replied. "People fear what they don't understand. Kids, even more so." Evan nodded slowly, then asked the question his curiosity had been building toward for years. "Mr. Earl, what are you building?" Earl looked down at the parts spread across the blanket. Every bolt, every gear, every polished panel reflecting the sun. For a moment, he didn't answer. He just stared, like he was looking at something only he could see. Then he said quietly, "Something I promised myself I'd finish before I die." Evan blinked. "That sounds serious." Earl nodded. "It is." "Is it dangerous?" Earl chuckled. "Only to people who doubt old men." Evan smiled despite himself. But inside the house next door, someone parted their curtains and frowned at the scene. That same woman later whispered to her husband, "He's collecting more junk. I think he's losing it." Her husband shrugged. "As long as he don't start fires out there, we're fine." Another neighbor, 2 houses down, shook his head as he mowed his lawn. "You think the city knows he's stockpiling trash back there?" "Should report it before rats take over." A man walking his dog muttered, "I heard he talks to the parts like they're alive. Shame. Age really does catch up. Someone else chimed in. Maybe he's building something dangerous. Shouldn't old folks be supervised? Every comment drifted over the fence. Earl heard all of it. He always did. But instead of reacting, he placed the finished frame on its side, lifted a metal sheet, and began fitting it into place with methodical precision. ... The whispers, the gossip, the staring, none of it could interrupt the rhythm inside him. He had waited too long, planned too carefully, held this secret too close to his heart. He wouldn't let noise break his focus now. Eventually, Evan's bus arrived at the far end of the block. The boy gave Earl one last worried look. "You gonna be okay?" he asked. Earl smiled softly. "Son, I've been okay longer than most people been alive." Evan didn't fully understand, but he nodded and jogged toward the bus, glancing back twice before he climbed aboard. By midday, Earl was alone again. Just him, the sun, and the quiet clink of metal against metal. The recorded a video. "Old man losing his mind," someone captioned online. "He's wasting his retirement building garbage," another wrote. "He needs a caretaker before he hurts himself." Earl saw none of it. He just kept working. Every bolt turned, every panel aligned, every piece placed with a reverence no one understood. Only one person had stayed long enough to even wonder. And he was on a school bus, staring out the window, thinking about the old man and the strange gleam in his eyes. Something was coming. Evan could feel it. The neighbors could sense it. The teens were joking about it. But only Earl knew what kind of storm he was quietly preparing for. And the world around him had absolutely no idea how close they were to being proven wrong. By late afternoon, the sun had begun its slow descent, pulling long shadows across Earl's yard. The air settled into that quiet, in-between hour when children hadn't yet gone inside and adults were just beginning to emerge from their homes after work. It was the kind of time when the whole street could see anyone and anything. And today they saw Earl, all of him, and everything he rolled into his yard. He had just set down the last crate, heavier than it looked, when the first wave of teenagers arrived, coasting down the sidewalk on scratched-up bikes. Marcus led them, as usual, a boy with a mouth sharper than his mind, and a chip on his shoulder heavy enough to drag anyone else down. He screeched to a stop right in front of Earl's gate. His friends nearly collided with him. "Yo!" Marcus yelled, already grinning. "Old man's at it again." The boys leaned their bikes against the fence, craning their necks to peer inside. Earl heard them before he saw them. The thump of rubber tires, the clatter of bike chains, the too loud laughter kids used when they wanted an audience. Earl straightened up, but didn't turn, didn't give them the satisfaction. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and kept working on the large chrome panel spread across a blanket. Behind him, Marcus called out again, louder this time, making sure anyone within 3 houses could hear. "Hey, Earl, you building a spaceship? Rocket? DeLorean? What's the masterpiece this week?" One of the boys burst into forced laughter, nudging another. "Maybe it's a walker with turbo boost." Another kid cupped his hands around his mouth, mockingly. "Don't explode the neighborhood, all right? Some of us got lives to live." Earl finally turned, slowly, with the kind of patience only loneliness or wisdom could teach. He met their eyes calmly. "Boys," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "Ain't nothing here for you to worry about." Marcus smirked. "Oh, nah, we worried. Whole street worried. You got wires and junk all over? Might blow up, might summon aliens? We don't know." The boys howled with exaggerated laughter, slapping each other's backs. Earl turned away again, bending to reach another part. They didn't like being ignored. people like Marcus never did. Marcus hopped the fence in one smooth motion. His friends followed, one by. Then he noticed the large covered object near the shed. The one Earl always kept draped with a thick tarp, tied down on all sides. Marcus walked toward it. Earl took an instinctive step forward. "Don't touch that." Marcus grinned like a wolf. "What? This?" He grabbed the tarp and tugged at one corner. Earl's hands trembled. "Son, don't." But the boy yanked harder, until another voice cut through the air. "Marcus, leave it alone." Evan came running across the street, backpack bouncing against his shoulder. He slid to a stop just inside the gate, breathless. Marcus turned and scoffed. "Here comes Captain Charity Case, always saving this old dude." Evan ignored him and moved to Earl's side. "You okay, Mr. Earl?" Earl nodded once, silently appreciative. Marcus looked between the two of them and rolled his eyes. "This is lame. Come on, let's see what's under." Before he could finish, the tarp shifted slightly from the earlier tug, and a glint of metal peeked through. It was only a sliver, a curve of polished steel, a rounded edge dipped in gold. But it was enough. Enough to make the boys stop laughing. Marcus frowned. "What the?" He reached again. Evan grabbed his wrist. "Marcus, don't." Marcus shoved him hard. Evan stumbled backward, nearly falling. Earl stepped between them instantly. His voice was no longer soft. It carried weight, years, storms. "That's enough." Everyone froze, even the neighbors, because by this time people had started gathering. A man mowing his lawn cut his engine and watched. A woman watering her plants crossed her arms, curious. Two kids riding scooters slowed down. A door opened somewhere. Porch chairs creaked. Curtains shifted. The entire street could feel something building. Marcus lifted his chin defiantly. "We ain't doing nothing wrong." "You're trespassing," Earl said firmly, "and you're disrespectful." Marcus scoffed. "Man, who cares? You're a nobody." The words hung in the air like poison, sharp, cruel, intentional. The kind that cuts deeper because it echoes things Earl had heard too many times in his life. The crowd murmured. Even his friends shifted uncomfortably. Evan stepped forward again, voice trembling but louder this time. "He's not a nobody. You just don't know nothing about him," Marcus sneered. "Oh yeah? What's he hiding under that tarp? A metal coffin for himself?" More laughter from his boys, but it was thinner now, forced. Then Marcus reached for the tarp again. He grabbed it with both hands, pulled hard. Earl moved faster than anyone expected, grabbing the tarp and Marcus's arm at the same time. "Don't you touch that!" The force startled. For the first time, fear flashed in Marcus's eyes. Just a flicker. Earl realized he was shaking, not from anger, from the fear that decades of work, decades of secrecy, might be torn open by a child who thought the world revolved around him. Evan stepped in front of Earl protectively. "Stop! Just go home, Marcus." Marcus straightened up, embarrassed that Evan had defended the old man instead of him. His pride, not logic, kicked in. "Man, screw this place. Let's bounce." He spat on the ground near Earl's boots. The final insult. Then he hopped the fence and stomped off, his friends scrambling after him. The crowd slowly dissipated. Earl didn't answer at first. He just stared at it, his life's secret, nearly exposed. His hands hovered over the fabric, almost protectively. Finally, he whispered, "Something I should have finished a long time ago." Evan swallowed. "Is it dangerous?" Earl chuckled softly. "Only to people who can't see value past dust." Evan looked at the tarp again, at how carefully it was tied, how perfectly it concealed the shape beneath. His curiosity burned stronger than ever, but he didn't ask again. Earl wasn't ready. Not yet. As evening settled, the last glow of sunlight touched the corner of the tarp, just enough to make that sliver of metal peek through once more. Evan's breath caught. Whatever Earl had been building, it wasn't junk, not even close. And the entire neighborhood was about to find out exactly how wrong they had been. Evening crept in slowly, wrapping the neighborhood in a blanket of cool, bluish dusk. The streetlights flickered awake one by one, washing Earl's chipped fence and crooked mailbox in an amber glow. Earl stood in his yard long after the crowd had drifted away, hands resting on the tarp-covered shape as though guarding a sleeping giant. Evan hovered nearby, not speaking, just making sure the old man wasn't alone. Crickets hummed. A dog barked in the distance. The world seemed to settle until the deep rumble of an engine broke the quiet. Not the sputtering kind from old cars around the neighborhood, not the loud, flashy exhaust from Marcus's friends. This was different, purposeful, heavy, expensive. Evan turned first. A long, black SUV rolled down the street, tinted windows, polished exterior, government-grade tires gripping the road like a predator. Earl's breath caught. He knew that sound. He knew that vehicle. The SUV slowed more, stopped, right in front of his gate. The back door opened with a soft electronic click, and a tall man stepped out, dressed in a charcoal suit tailored too perfectly for anyone from around here. His shoes clicked once against the asphalt, sharp enough to slice the silence in half. He walked toward Earl with the confidence of someone who had stood behind podiums, in boardrooms, on televised stages. But when he reached Earl, he stopped and bowed his head respectfully. "Mr. Bennett," the man said softly, voice steady, polished but warm. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." Evan blinked. Earl didn't speak, not yet. He simply studied the man's face, looking for a sign, a memory, a clue. The stranger straightened. "I'm Dr. Marcus Hale, lead historian for the National Automotive Restoration Society." Evan's eyes widened. Dr. Hale? That Dr. Hale? The man whose documentaries Evan had watched on YouTube late at night? The expert whose lectures cost hundreds just to sit in the back row? The one museums hired to authenticate priceless automotive artifacts? Evan whispered, almost breathless, "You're famous." Hale smiled briefly at the boy. Then he turned back to Earl. "You called our team 2 months ago," he said gently. "Told us you needed someone who would listen. Someone who wouldn't laugh." Evan felt the words hit like a stone in his gut. Earl had called someone, not for help, but for understanding, because no one here had ever given him even that. Earl finally lifted his chin. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said quietly. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from years of being dismissed. "Didn't think anybody would believe an old man had the last one." Hale stepped forward. "Sir, we believed every word." He turned toward the tarp-covered shape, lowering his voice as if standing before something sacred. "May I?" Hale asked. Earl hesitated. His fingers curled around the edge of the tarp. This was his life's secret. Decades of salvaging, repairing, writing letters, searching scrapyards, hiding parts, and keeping faith when everyone else saw trash. Letting someone else see it felt like exposing his heart. But he nodded. Hale lifted the tarp slowly, reverently, like unveiling a masterpiece. A metallic sheen shimmered beneath. Curved panels, custom rivets, lines of design so smooth They could only belong to one era, one legend. Evan gasped. The breath punched out of him like he'd been hit. It wasn't a car, not yet, but it wasn't junk either. It was a dream being rebuilt bolt by bolt. Hale's voice broke the silence, soft, trembling with awe. My God, it is the Proteus 1 prototype. Evan snapped his head toward him. What's that? Hale looked at the boy, eyes bright. A car that never made it into production. Only 3 were ever built. All destroyed in an explosion at the factory in 1966. He turned back to Earl. Or so we thought. The wind drifted through, lifting the tarp slightly and revealing the gold-tinted trim, the old emblem, shaped like wings, and part of a hand-restored chassis. Evan's heart pounded against his ribs. Mr. Earl, you built all this? Earl shook his head. No, I saved it. He looked at Hale. You know the story. Hale nodded, eyes softening. You worked at the factory when you were 19. Earl nodded slowly. I swept floors, cleaned parts, watched the mechanics work. I saw the Proteus with my own eyes. She was beautiful. He placed a trembling hand on the chassis. When the explosion happened, they told everyone to walk away. Forget it ever existed. Evan whispered, but you didn't. Earl smiled, a lonely, tired smile. No, son, I didn't. I came back at night, pulled out anything I could find before they bulldozed the rest. They thought everything was ruined. Hale stepped closer. But you preserved it, Earl nodded. For 52 years, piece by piece, Evan's chest tightened. How could everyone have mocked this man? How could the whole street call him crazy? Hale turned to the boy, speaking softly. This car is priceless, the last of its kind, automotive history. He faced Earl again. And you, Mr. Bennett, you may be the last man alive who remembers how to build it. Earl's eyes glistened. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever acknowledged the weight of what he carried alone. Dr. Hale snapped his fingers, and the rear door of the SUV opened again. His team stepped out, careful, respectful, carrying cases of tools and specialized equipment. Neighbors peeked out their windows. Porch lights flipped on. Curtains shifted. People holding cups of tea froze mid-sip. Evan whispered, "They're here for you, Mr. Earl." And for the first time in years, Earl stood a little straighter, a little taller. My team and I, Dr. Hale said, would be honored to help you finish what you started. Earl pressed a hand to his chest, overwhelmed. You really think we can? Hale smiled. Sir, the world has been waiting for this car to rise again, and you're the only man who can bring it back. Evan looked between them, the overlooked old man and the famous historian, and felt pride swell in his chest. Suddenly, Earl wasn't a strange old man anymore. He wasn't poor. He wasn't crazy. He was extraordinary, and the world was finally about to see it. By the time Dr. Marcus Hale's team carried their equipment into Earl's yard, the street had shifted from quiet curiosity to full-blown alert. People who'd once walked past Earl's house without a second glance were now suddenly finding reasons to step outside. Trash cans were taken out twice. Plants were watered that didn't need it. Mailboxes were checked 3 times in an hour. Every eye in the neighborhood drifted the same direction. Toward the peeling house at the end of the road. Toward the old man no one had ever really bothered to know. Evan stood inside the gate now, no longer on the outside looking in. He helped where he could, carrying a toolbox, holding a flashlight, fetching rags, too young to fully understand the history, old enough to know this was important. Right here, Earl grunted, pointing to a set of bolts near the front of the frame. That crossmember gotta sit flush, or the whole front end's gonna shake itself apart. Hale's chief mechanic, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and a tattoo of a wrench on her forearm, nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir," she said. "You show me, I'll follow." Earl chuckled. "Ain't been called sir in a long time. Y'all go make my head big." The crew laughed, but the mood stayed reverent, almost like a ceremony. They worked together, piece by piece. Heavy engine parts lifted carefully into place. Polished components slid onto mounts Earl had reinforced long ago. Wires examined, compared to old diagrams. Earl pulled from his notebook. Every time a question came up, Earl had the answer. Not on a screen, not in a textbook, in his head. "It ain't supposed to be flush there," he corrected gently at one point. They left that gap so it could breathe. She ran hot, needed extra room for air to move. Hale stared at him. "You remember that?" Earl shrugged like it was nothing. "I remember everything about her. Watch that car like other folks watch TV." The sun dipped lower in the sky. Shadows stretched long. The once empty sidewalk was now lined with clusters of whispering neighbors. Even Marcus and his boys had drifted back, bikes parked against a distant pole as they watched from behind their phones. Marcus zoomed in with his camera app. "What even is that thing?" one of his friends muttered. "Dude, I saw that guy," another said, pointing at Hale. "He's on those car shows my uncle watches. Why's he here with him?" He jerked his chin toward Earl. Marcus licked his lips nervously. He didn't have an answer, because deep down he already knew. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was history, and he'd been laughing at it. Across the street, Mrs. Landry clutched her cardigan at her chest. "You mean to tell me," she whispered to the man beside her, "Old Earl's been hiding some kind of famous car all this time?" The man nodded slowly. "Looks like it, but he's so quiet." "Quiet don't mean dumb, Nora." She fell silent, cheeks warm with shame. Cars began to crawl slower along the road, drivers craning their necks to get a better view. Somebody parked at the corner, rolled down their window, and just sat there, watching as the work continued. The air started to buzz, not from the tools, but from the simmer of rumors starting to boil over. Then, a white van appeared, big, bulky, with a satellite dish on top. Across the side in bold blue letters, Local 7 News. Evan's jaw dropped. "They're here already?" he whispered. Hale gave a small, knowing smile. "I may have sent a message on the way here," he admitted quietly. "Truth like this needs a witness." A woman in a blazer stepped out of the van, her hair perfectly styled, makeup just right. A cameraman followed with a large shoulder-mounted camera. They approached the fence carefully, respectful but clearly excited. "Dr. Hale," the reporter called, her voice already in on-air mode. "Is it true? You've confirmed the identity of the parts?" Hale nodded. "Yes, this is the Proteus 1 prototype, the last one. And it's here because this man," he gestured toward Earl, "decided it was worth saving when nobody else did." The reporter turned toward Earl, her expression softening. "Mr. Bennett, did you ever imagine this day would come?" Earl chuckled under his breath, rubbing a grease-stained thumb across his cheek. "Ma'am, I wasn't even sure I'd live long enough to see it," he said honestly. "I just did what I..." Back inside the news van, someone typed furiously on a laptop, editing live captions. "Local hero secretly restores lost automotive legend. Neighbors shocked. We had no idea who he was." The live feed hit the station. From there, it hit the internet. And from there, it hit everywhere. Phones in the neighborhood buzzed with alerts. People inside their houses put their forks down. TVs flicked on mid-dinner. Earl's quiet little yard became the center point of a storm. The work went on. The engine, polished and assembled, was carefully lowered into place. The small crowd fell silent as the heavy machinery descended, chains creaking softly under the weight. Earl watched like a father seeing his child take a first breath. "Careful," he murmured. "She's been waiting a long time." The engine settled into its cradle with a deep metal sigh. Perfect fit. The mechanic with the wrench tattoo hit the mount bolts, tightening them with practiced precision. Hale scribbled notes. The crew snapped reference photos. Evan stood so close now he could see his own reflection in the chrome. "Hey, Mr. Earl," he whispered. "What's it feel like, seeing it come together?" Earl thought for a moment. "Feels like—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Feels like I've been underwater my whole life, and I finally came up for air." Evan swallowed past the lump in his throat. Behind them, the news crew kept filming, catching every turn of the wrench, every careful touch, every fleeting expression on Earl's face. In living rooms across town, and soon across the state, people watched in fascinated silence. "That's old Earl from the edge of town," a man said from his couch. "No way," his wife replied, leaning forward. "He comes into my diner. I thought he was just some quiet widower." At a bar downtown, a patron pointed at the screen. "Didn't that guy used to work at the old factory?" An older man at the corner table nodded. "Yeah, he was one of the sharpest minds there. Nobody ever gave him the credit he deserved." The bartender shook his head slowly. "Guess they're giving it now." As twilight deepened, the lights from the SUV and news van illuminated the yard. The car's body wasn't fully assembled yet, but the skeleton was there. The engine sat proudly. Wheels, not final but placeholders, had been rolled into position. It looked less like a pile of parts and more like what it was always meant to be: a machine built from genius, saved by stubbornness, resurrected by faith. Marcus and his friends edged closer, their earlier bravado gone. One of them whispered, "Dude, we called that junk." Marcus stared, heart heavy. Evan caught his eye. There was no smugness there, just something simpler. "You were wrong. We all were." Dr. Hale finished a call on his phone and turned back to Earl. "Just got off with our board," he said. "They want to send a curator out, and several private collectors are already reaching out too." Earl frowned. "Collectors? I ain't interested in no rich man's toy garage." Hale smiled. "Neither are we. We were thinking museum, education, a restored Proteus on display with your story right beside it. Not anonymous worker, not unknown mechanic." His gaze softened, voice dropping. "Your name, Mr. Bennett, on the plaque, where it always should have been." Earl swallowed hard. "Nobody ever put my name on nothing before," he said. "They just put my work under theirs." "Then it's time we fix that," Hale said. The reporter, still close by, glanced at her cameraman with a look that screamed, "This is gold." All the years of being overlooked, all the days of being laughed at, all the times people walked past, assuming crazy, poor, worthless, and now the whole world was watching him with something new in their eyes. Respect, admiration, gratitude. Earl turned slowly, looking past the cameras, past the bright lights, past the polished suits and buzzing phones. He looked at the faces at the fence. Neighbors, teens, the mailman, the lady with the small dog, the man who always jogged with headphones on, people who'd known his address but never his story. He cleared his throat. "Y'all been watching me roll carts and drag things out this yard for years," he said, voice carrying across the sudden hush. "Some of you thought I was crazy. Some of you thought I was just hoarding trash." No one moved. No one dared interrupt. He nodded toward the shining engine and the assembled structure. "This is what I was building," he said gently. "Not just the car, but a promise. To myself, to the men who never got to finish it. To the boy I used to be, who thought maybe, just maybe, his work might matter one day." A breeze swept through the yard, rustling the edges of the tarp, still covering half the frame. Earl breathed out a laugh, half joy, half ache. "People laugh at what they don't understand," he said, "but that don't change the truth of what you're holding." Hale watched him with quiet pride. Evan's chest ached with something he'd never felt this strongly before. Hope, right here, in this yard, from a man everyone had written off a long time ago. The storm had hit. Not the kind that tore roofs off or flooded the street. A different kind. The kind that stripped away lies, washed off years of judgment, and left the truth, standing clean and undeniable in the middle of a once-forgotten yard. And for the first time in a very long time, Earl Bennett stood right there with it. Even with the news lights shining and half the town gathered around the fence, Earl's yard went strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes right before someone speaks a truth the world has ignored for too long. Earl wiped his hands on a clean rag. One Evan handed him, and walked slowly toward the porch. His steps were stiff, careful, as though each memory weighing on him added 5 more pounds to his shoes. Dr. Hale and his team watched. The neighbors watched. The news crew watched. Evan watched most of all. The old man sat down on the porch step, exhaled deeply, and stared at the car frame, sitting proudly under the floodlights. "You want to know why I kept all this?" he asked aloud, voice steady but soft. No one answered. No one dared. He touched the porch railing with trembling fingers, as though searching for courage buried under the peeling paint. "I was 19 the first time I heard that engine run," he said. "Didn't know nothing about engineering then. Just swept floors at the factory. All the big guys, the designers, the suit wearers, they treated me like part of the wall, like I wasn't supposed to even breathe around them." Evan inched closer, swallowing hard. "But one night," Earl continued, eyes glazing with memory, "the lead engineer, Mr. Lawson, couldn't get the injection timing right. They'd been at it for hours. Folks were tired, hungry, frustrated." His hands moved while he spoke, remembering the shape of tools that once seemed bigger than his dreams. "I was mopping the floor near the bench, and I just said, softly, maybe it's not the timing. Maybe it's the airflow." A few neighbors exchanged confused glances, and you know what happened? Earl looked up at the crowd. They laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but dismissively, like he wasn't worth real consideration. "But, Mr. Lawson, he didn't laugh. He told me to explain." The old man's lips curled into a faint smile. "I drew it on a scrap of cardboard. Airflow, distribution, mount angle, little adjustments that could keep her from overheating." "What happened?" Evan whispered. Earl pointed toward the engine gleaming under the lights. "She roared, strong and clean. First time all week. They wrote it down. In their notes, not mine. And right then and there I realized something." He took a long breath. "That car wasn't theirs. It was everyone's. Every voice, even the small ones, helped build her." The crowd listened, frozen. "But when the company went bankrupt," Earl said, voice tightening, "they told us to scrap everything, to destroy the prototype, said it was company property, and should die with the company. He shook his head, grief and defiance swirling in his tired eyes. But something in me wouldn't let it happen. I kept thinking of all the hands that touched her, all the minds that poured life into her, and I couldn't watch it disappear like we never mattered. So he saved it, piece by piece, over decades. At first, folks thought it was odd, he said. Then funny, then pathetic. They said old Earl was hoarding junk, said I was senile, said I didn't have a life. His voice cracked, just once. No one ever asked why. Evan blinked fast, fighting tears. Mrs. Landry whispered, "Lord, forgive us." But Earl wasn't looking for pity. He wasn't even angry, just finally free. When my wife passed, he continued softly, this project is what kept me getting out of bed. She always said, he swallowed hard, finish what you started, Earl. Don't leave that dream half-built. He wiped his eyes, a rare gesture no one expected to see. So I worked on it, through grief, through sickness, through folks laughing at me in the grocery store, through neighbors crossing the street to avoid talking to me. He lifted his chin. But I kept going because I believed one day, somewhere would see her, really see her. Dr. Hale stepped forward, stunned by the weight of what he'd just heard. Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, why didn't you come forward sooner? Any museum, any historian, any collector would have taken you seriously. Earl chuckled, a small, sad sound. Sir, folks never took me serious when I had youth and strength. Why would they take me serious when I'm old and worn out? The sentence hit like a hammer. Even the teens lowered their heads. Evan sat beside him without asking permission. Close, respectfully, like family. Mr. Earl, he whispered, you did good, real good. The old man looked at him, and for the first time that evening, a full smile stretched across Earl's face. Warm, grateful, proud. You're the first one to say that in a long time, boy. Silence settled heavier than before. Not uncomfortable, but reverent. Earl straightened his back. I wasn't building a machine, he said. I was holding on to history. This car is proof that men like me, black men from the wrong side of town, built things in this country worth remembering, worth saving, worth celebrating. His voice rose, steady and strong. And if they bury our stories, they bury part of America. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hale placed a hand on Earl's shoulder. We won't let that happen, Hale promised. Not to you, not to your work. Earl nodded slowly. Then I reckon this is the day I've been waiting for. A police siren whooped once, not a warning, but a signal. Evan stood quickly. The neighbors tensed. But then, the county sheriff himself stepped forward. He wasn't here to arrest. He wasn't here to scold. He was here to recognize. Mr. Bennett, he said respectfully, the mayor's office just called. They want to honor you publicly. Not next month, not next week. Tomorrow morning. Gasps erupted. Phones flew out again. Someone shouted, "About time!" The sheriff handed Earl a folded paper. You'll be speaking at City Hall. They're calling it Bennett Day. Earl froze. For a moment, the world seemed too bright, too loud, too big. Evan held his arm so he wouldn't sway. You deserve it, the boy murmured. Earl blinked fast, then whispered, I ain't never been honored for nothing in my life. Evan smiled. Then we'll start with this. He extended his hand. Earl took it. Grateful, steady, strong. The breaking point had come, but it didn't break him. It broke the lies people believed about him. It broke the walls the town built between us and him. It broke the silence that kept his story in the shadows, and for the first time, Earl Bennett wasn't the strange old man at the edge of town. He was the man who saved a legend, and the world finally knew his name. Morning sunlight settled over Earl's house like a quiet blessing, warm, steady, impossible to ignore. For the first time in decades, cars lined the narrow street leading up to his porch. Not police cars, not utility trucks, media vans, local residents, city officials, historians, automotive collectors wearing suits too tight for rural heat. And somewhere in the middle of the crowd stood Evan Mitchell, bouncing on his heels with excitement. Inside the house, Earl adjusted the collar of his only formal shirt, a crisp white one his wife insisted he keep for special occasions. He hadn't worn it since her funeral. As he looked in the mirror, his hands trembled. Not because of nerves, but because he could hear her voice. "Hold your head high, Earl. You are worth more than they ever saw." He swallowed hard and touched her old wedding ring hanging from a chain around his neck. "Miss you, baby," he whispered. "Wish you were here for this." A knock sounded at the door. "Mr. Bennett?" Evan's voice drifted in. "They're ready for you." Earl opened the door. Outside, the crowd parted. Not out of fear, not out of pity, out of respect. Evan offered his arm like a grandson escorting royalty. Earl chuckled. "Boy, I can walk." "I know," Evan said, still holding out his arm, "but today you shouldn't have to." The old man accepted. The mayor met him at the entrance. Not with a handshake, with a hug. "Mr. Bennett," she said warmly, "this town owes you an apology and a celebration." Earl nodded shyly. "Ma'am, I just did what felt right." Dr. Hale, already at the podium, leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor a man whose brilliance hid in plain sight. A man dismissed, ignored, underestimated, yet who quietly preserved a piece of American engineering history. A photo of the restored prototype flashed on the screen behind him. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. Earl lowered his head, overwhelmed. Hale continued. "The Bennett prototype will become the centerpiece of the National Automotive Heritage Museum." And in recognition of his extraordinary dedication, Earl Bennett will receive a payment of $4 million. Gasps rippled across the room, but Earl didn't react to the money. He reacted to one sentence, "And a permanent museum wing will bear his name." His knees wobbled. Evan grabbed his hand gently. The mayor stepped forward again. And today, February 17th, is officially Earl Bennett Day. The applause was thunderous. Some people cried. Some neighbors who once mocked him now stood with heads bowed, ashamed. Earl stepped to the microphone. His voice trembled. "I ain't used to crowds like this," he began. "I spent my life in shadows, workin', fixin', savin' pieces of something everyone said was worthless." He paused, scanning the faces. Some familiar, some once cruel, all listening. "But I didn't keep those parts because I wanted fame or money. I kept them because when I looked at that car, I saw potential nobody else did. And maybe because I knew what it felt like to be thrown away." Silence fell heavy and meaningful. "I don't today reminds y'all. Sometimes the people you overlook hold the greatest stories. Sometimes the loudest voices ain't the wisest. And sometimes the quiet ones keep the whole world going without anyone noticing." The audience erupted again, this time with a standing ovation. Evan was first on his feet. Hours later, the crowd trickled away. Media packed up equipment. Neighbors, now much kinder, burst with questions and congratulations. Earl sat on his porch, exhausted but glowing. He watched workers carefully load the restored car onto the museum's armored trailer. Evan plopped in beside him. You did, Mr. Bennett! Earl chuckled. No, boy, we did it. Evan blinked. Me? You believed me when they didn't, helped when they mocked. You got a good heart. Reminds me of my wife. Evan looked away quickly, pretending not to wipe a tear. A black sedan pulled up. Dr. Hale stepped out with a folder. Mr. Bennett, before we finalize everything, I wanted to ask you something. Earl raised a brow. What's that? Hale smiled. I want Evan to join the museum's youth apprenticeship program. Fully paid, full mentorship, starting immediately. Evan's mouth fell open. Me? Why? Hale gestured to Earl. Because he believes in people, just like you, and we need that in our field. Earl nudged Evan. Well, go on. Say yes. Evan nearly shouted, yes. Hale laughed, handing Earl a copy of the partnership contract. We start renovations this week. Your museum wing will be called the Bennett Legacy Center. Earl's hand shook again. Legacy. He never thought he'd have one. Dusk settled over the yard. Earl and Evan stood by the shed where the car once lived. The shed looked empty now, quiet, almost sacred. You okay? Evan asked. Earl smiled softly. Yeah, son, just thinking. I spent half my life fighting to keep something alive, and now it's going out into the world. Evan nodded. You didn't lose it, Mr. Bennett. You shared it. Earl placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You're gonna do good things, Evan. Better than me. Evan swallowed hard. You did great things. The old man looked up at the sky, a faint tear caught in the corner of his eye, one he didn't hide this time. And to think, all this happened 'cause folks finally stopped laughing long enough to listen. He took a deep breath. Feels good to be seen. The camera, imaginary or literal, would pull back now. Earl Bennett standing with a teenager who believed in him. An empty shed glowing in sunset. A house no longer forgotten. A legacy no longer hidden. A man no longer underestimated. Scene 7 closes on a quiet truth. Sometimes the world needs to be reminded that even the softest voices can echo the loudest when truth finally arrives. The night settled over Earl's property like a warm blanket, soft, quiet, full of meaning. The last of the workers had left. The news vans were gone. Even the neighbors had finally drifted back into their homes, humbled and thoughtful. But Earl Bennett didn't sleep. He stood alone at the edge of his shed, hands folded behind his back, staring into the empty space where his car once sat. 20 years of effort gone in a single afternoon. Yet his heart wasn't empty. It was overflowing. The moonlight spilled across the wooden floorboards, highlighting oil stains, tool scratches, and handwritten notes still pinned to the wall. The air smelled like motor grease and memories. Earl took a long breath. This place done raised we all over again, he whispered. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the hollow shed. Without the car, the room felt bigger, like a chapter had ended and another waited patiently at the next page. Evan approached slowly from behind him. You okay, Mr. Bennett? Earl nodded without turning around. I'm more than okay, son. I'm grateful. Evan stepped beside him, hands tucked into his pockets. You know, the boy said, I always wondered what you were building out here. Earl chuckled. Everyone wondered. Just nobody cared enough to ask. Evan stayed quiet, letting the moment breathe. Earl let his fingers glide across the workbench, wood worn smooth from decades of sanding, tightening, measuring, dreaming. I spent so long hiding parts, saving scraps, telling myself the world would laugh if they saw what I was doing. You weren't wrong, Evan said gently. No, Earl agreed. I wasn't. He walked toward the open shed door, staring out at the night sky. "But here's the thing, Evan. I didn't build that car to prove him wrong." The boy listened, eyes wide. "I built it because some dreams don't die," Earl said, "even when the world tries to bury 'em." He took another breath, slow, steady. "Folks laughed at me for years, called me crazy, said I was hoarding junk, but what they didn't know was, sometimes junk is treasure that ain't been understood yet." Evan nodded slowly. "And sometimes," Earl added with a soft smile, "people are the same way." The words settled into the air like truth finally finding its home. He turned toward the boy. "All my life, people looked at me and only saw an old—" Earl's smile deepened. "I know that now." The two stood in silence, side by side, gazing into the empty shed where a forgotten piece of history had been reborn. "You know what I learned?" Earl finally said. Evan shook his head. "That the worth of a thing ain't decided by folks who don't understand it," he said softly. "Worth, real worth, comes from purpose, from heart, from the hands that built it, and the soul behind it." He exhaled, letting years of pain slip out with that breath. "And sometimes," he continued, "the world don't see your value until someone who's looking with the right eyes opens the door for you." Evan blinked fast. "You think Dr. Hale opened that door?" Earl shook his head. "No, son. You did." The boy's eyes widened. "I never would have gotten this far without someone standing beside me, not laughing, not mocking, just believing. That's all a man needs sometimes. One person who believes." Evan's voice broke. "I'm glad I could be that person." Earl placed a hand on his shoulder. "And I hope you remember this, Evan. Never judge a man by the dust on his boots or the rust on his dreams." He turned toward the starlit sky. "People laugh at what they don't understand," he said softly. "But someday, if they open their eyes, they'll realize the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones they call strange or useless." He paused. "Are often the ones holding the strongest stories." The night breeze rustled the trees, carrying his words into the dark. Earl smiled one last time, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in decades. "I didn't build that car to be remembered," he said. "I built it because every man deserves something beautiful to leave behind." He stepped out of the shed, turning off the light. As the door clicked shut, he whispered, "Sometimes the greatest treasure is the one the world tried to throw away." Evan walked beside him as they headed toward the house. Two generations connected by respect, proving that value isn't defined by wealth, age, or appearances, but by the quiet integrity of a life well lived.